Um, Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Let me walk through you the presentation. Now, the very first slide asks the question or re-asks the question: palm oil in the global, the importance of palm oil in the global scenario. Uh, can you hear me? Good. The reason I put this up was in traveling and promoting. There have been very recently a number of occasions when people have confronted us at MPOC and said, is palm oil on the brink of becoming a sunset industry because of all the anti-palm oil campaigns, the anti-palm oil effects that they have? Okay, some problem with the mic. Yep, I'll hang on to this. And this is the problem. But if you look at palm oil, it features among the top 4 oils and fats that are produced and traded in the world today. And there's no reason to believe that despite all the campaign and anti-palm oil noises that happen, this commodity is going to disappear from the face of the earth. And we need to keep this going. But what really is happening is that the nature of its application, its use, is shifting as we go by. Even though currently palm oil accounts for about 30% of the global oils and fats pattern. Now, many years ago, when we started producing this commodity in large quantities, 80% of the production was for food. And we were proud to tell the world that this is a food commodity. But the geographical demands of palm oil have changed quite a bit. For example, in Europe, it is no more 80% of the palm oil that is used for food. Today, if you look at Europe as a single scenario, it's like 55 to 60% of the total palm oil imported in Europe is used for renewable energy. And only about 40% is used for food. And there are obvious reasons why this is happening. But the rest of the world is very dependent on palm as an affordable food commodity. And this is where the niche will continue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, many of you who have been attending POTS over the years would know that this is a familiar slide, which depicts on the left, the countries that are dependent and continue to be dependent on imported oils to feed their population. And on the right, there are the countries that produce and sell to the nations and the world that demand this oil. Now, this slide, coincidentally, was first fabricated in MPOC 10 years ago. And over the years, we have looked at the data and tried to change the paradigm of this producing nations versus the consumption nation. In the last decade, honestly, nothing has changed. This is exactly what we did 10 years ago, and it is still relevant. And the question we ask is, if tomorrow, between Malaysia and Indonesia, if we are forced to reduce the acreage of the oil palm cultivation, what is likely to happen to the overall supply system, the oils and fats supply chain in the global hemisphere? It is going to be turmoil of the finest order, and this underscores the need for the oils and fats producing countries to keep producing no matter what the pressure on them. Let it be price, let it be sustainability, let it be environmental demands, etc. So there are the gaps need to be filled, and we are happy in Malaysia, a small country, to be able to fill this gap. Now, the gap becomes even more important because Paul did talk about it, that currently there is almost a balance between production and consumption of oils and fats. That, of course, there's the overbearing stocks, occasional stocks, and this will go. But there will come a point when production is going to lag given the consumption demands of a growing population. And when that occurs, don't forget that the oils and fats are one of the three macronutrients that are required for maintenance of human health. And if we do not have enough of that, this is going to be a problematic situation. And continuous planting and replanting or even expansion of all oilseeds and oils and fats bearing crops may be needed, but the world is actually restricted in the area, the total area of arable agriculture land that it can devote to this crop. And so this is also going to be a challenge. The two speakers previous to me also talked about price, and we sit in a palm oil trade commodity segment. Currently, as we speak, we are experiencing low prices. And the spread between the most competitive, our most competitive oil, soybean oil versus palm is actually quite large. Now, the question always in our minds at MPOC and with the trade is, how do we narrow this price differential? Because traditionally, at any given point, palm has traded at a discount to soya. It has been on an average of 80 to 100 US dollars, but today it's much larger. The question is, we need to narrow the price range to more competitive levels so that palm has a better return to the industry. But in the marketplace, this differential price sometimes, not always, sometimes pushes the uptake of palm. And for a while, when the prices are low and we are troubled with some overbearing high stocks, these low prices are actually going to help push palm into a competitive range against the other competing oils. But this is a very complex mechanism. And like Paul indicated, it is not something that we can predict will happen in 1 or 2 months or even the next quarter. It appears to take its natural phase of supply and demand, and we have to live with it. So when my bosses ask, what are you going to do about the prices this week? Honestly, I don't know. That's the bottom line. We are driven by market forces. Now, the other component that drives demand and dictates pricing, dictates the trade, is actually legislation and trade barriers. Again, the previous speakers talked to some extent about this, but let me do this. You would assume that there is the concept of free trade, meaning everybody is on a rigid right platform and everybody is the equivalent of the Pope in the trading world. No, that's not happening. What we are seeing is that some of the most developed countries, and in this case, it's a G20, there are reports that indicate that the G20 protectionism among the G20 trading nations is very, very high. And leading the issue are countries like the United States, and included are major traders who trade in palm oil, India, for example. Now, with this kind of overlay on the industry, on the trade itself, it makes, it provides or it signifies certain amount of difficulty in achieving this trade. And I know that a number of other speakers will follow, will address these issues in further detail. But for us in the palm oil industry today, a very big challenge is the anti-palm oil debate. It comes in very many shapes, sizes, and challenges. Policies emerge around the world in producing countries, in importing countries, etc., and even in international bodies that dictate legislation, food standards, trade issues, etc. Every day there is a new challenge, and the challenge is thrown at you, and we have to be open with to these with eyes and ears wide open. If we don't do that, you in the industry get trouble with a possible ban. As last year, 2017, the hottest debate was the possible ban of palm oil in the biofuel segment in Europe. Things like that emerges. Embargoes come in. Quotas and taxes come in. And what we call as unfair trade certification requirements also creep in. And they come in very many shapes and sizes, and you have to be able to respond. Sometimes we can organize such responses. For example, we can organize our smallholders to respond to the proposed anti-palm oil ban in Europe, trying to win the sentiment of the European legislators and the consumers to say, please do not deprive our small farmers of a livelihood. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But these are things that we need to keep on top of. Now, if you look at the Malaysian palm oil trade, the top 3 importers of palm oil happen to be India, China, and Europe. Between these three entities, the nations and the groupings, they account for nearly 1/3 of the total Malaysian palm oil trade. And the problem with this is when these three sneeze, you and I get very feverish. And let me give you just 3 examples of what's happening. Very unassociated with the palm oil for a while is the ongoing US-China trade debate and the issue that the trade dispute that the Trump administration is forcing down the throat of the Chinese. Now, this has got significant implications, and the reading in the marketplace, unfortunately, is not always correct. Now, what is happening is, and this again, Thomas Milke has explained this very nicely, China turns out to be the biggest importer and end user of soybeans in the world, no matter where it comes from, the United States, Brazil, and Argentina. Now, when the debate and the issue, the dispute between the US and China started, here most people in the hall and even outside assume that we had a toe in, and that because of the dispute, we would quadruple or even double our export of palm oil to China, but not understanding that China buys soybean oil primarily for the meal component to fit into its animal husbandry, the requirements for soy meal. And the oil is, as usual, a byproduct, and the opportunity to increase the palm oil export to China as a result of this dispute is actually quite limited. And we had a lot of MPOC, for example, we had a lot of headache trying to explain this to the media, to the non-informed legislators, for example, that it is not a straight line curve increase for palm oil in the Chinese market, but there are additional challenges that we have too. Because if you look at the palm oil industry, there is no appreciable protein meal component coming from the palm oil industry except for palm kernel cake. And if you look at the protein quality in palm kernel quality and cake, quality and quantity, it's significantly lower than that of soya. So the challenge to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that can you redefine the protein content in PKC to a higher level, use biotechnology measures. We need investment, we need technology, we need R&D to increase the protein content and quality to fit into the market. Otherwise, in a dispute like this, when you know very clearly that it is a meal market and not the oil market, our ability to impinge on this market is really very limited. But even having said that, what happened last week? We were fortunate that the Prime Minister of the country was on an official delegation in China. And there was keen interest from the Chinese side to look into opportunities related to palm oil, not simply for the import of palm oil, but also downstream application investment in the palm oil industry. We managed to secure a number of memorandum of understanding with the Chinese in order to further increase uptake of Malaysian palm oil into China. Now, please remember, those are MOUs, and to reconstruct the MOUs into real trade outcomes is still a big order, but we are working on it, and this is where we need the industry to cooperate, collaborate, and become the provider of the material to increase uptake of China. So these are some things we need to do, and we keep doing this on your behalf. The next big giant that has been sneezing and without a remedial reaction has been my good friends from India. Now, India has this habit of suddenly dosing you with new tariffs. And in 2017 and 2018, we were not spared the Indian monsoonal rains of intermittent monsoonal rains, if I may say, of taxes spread at you. Now, every time India sneezes with increased taxes or associated duties, we pay a price. Now, my friends at sea, the sea will tell me this is because we are not selling crude palm oil, and the Indian refining industry is perpetually made up of an overcapacity of refining investments that need to be utilized onshore. But the bottom line is that this has had an impact, and it, at least for a while, it depreciated the volume of palm oil being traded into India, but we see corrective actions being taken along the way. And the Indians then came back and said, we just don't want to do this to palm. Let's also take the mickey out of the seed oils. And they did some correction along the way. Thank you for that. If you're a member from India, thank you for that. And that has spurred the market a little. So what I'm saying is that these type of legislations can never be foreseen from foreign governments or agencies, but these are things that we have to bear with it. But I must say, and we were a little bit cheeky and a little bit smiling at the background of it, because what happened was, as clever as the Indian government and the legislators were, they forgot one very important element, what we call as a boomerang effect, due to the association of South Asian member states. And as a result of this, somebody in the trade, there are always in the trade, there are more clever people than the legislators. Trust me, all of you are very clever people. Somebody very cleverly decided that, let me stream RBD palm oil from Bangladesh, for example, in India, and you don't have to pay the taxes that the Indians were hoping to do that. And this has created a sort of a feverish nightmare for the Indian legislators, and I assume that corrective measures are being taken, and again, you need to be diplomatic about these things. So that's India for you. Now, in the case of Europe, and I'm always tickled when Thomas tells me that, don't worry about Europe. Europe is not the end of the world for palm oil. It's just a noisemaker. Now, but the European noise is very acoustic, very loud. And the loudness is reflected by the anti-palm oil campaign. And the intensity of the anti-palm oil campaign grows and grows and grows. Now, why is this growing? I've been told that the European members of parliament are playing to the orchestra dictated by the voting population in Europe, meaning the general European assumes that he wants to go green, but not green in their own backyard, because they have destroyed their forests, and we need to force the greenery in the different part of the world. And so we are the recipients of the bad egg. That's one way of interpreting this. But this is a real historical event that needs to be addressed, and I hope that we as palm oil producing countries, including Indonesia, are putting some effective measures into the system. Now, this is not always green in the sense that they are not a balanced response, because there is a significant element of discrimination in doing this, and a need to protect their own industry. Yesterday, we had a special briefing by James Fry, and he aptly reminded that before the first Renewable Energy Directive kicked in and the biofuel mandates kicked in Europe many years ago, Europe was a net exporter of oils and fats in the form of rapeseed oil exports. Today, Europe is a net importer of oils and fats, and much of their import is targeted at amenable supplies of both palm and soya, which goes into the biofuel renewable energy mix. So there is an element of protectionism. But on the right, what you see is the accusation. The accusation that palm continuously deforests. Yes, we have been guilty in the past, or some of producing nations continue to be guilty even in the present. But if you look at many of the reports, including from the Union of Concerned Scientists, the real trigger for deforestation happens to be cattle grazing, the animal husbandry industry, and even soy. Now, it's very curious that, again, I refer back to Paul's slide, where he indicated that the growth in India, for example, for dairy products, is going to be very highly significant. And somebody around the world, maybe not in India, but many oceans away, is going to cash on the Indian demand for higher dairy products by putting more land under animal husbandry, which will impact the deforestation rate in that part of the world. So are the NGOs going to go after that in a vicious manner, but they are doing it palm? We'll have to see this. So the bottom line is that it's not always palm as the sole culprit doing this, but there are others. Now, when we talk about the anti-palm oil campaign, the last 2 weeks, many of you would have seen that slide, dirty palm oil. It comes under the thing Rantan. There's an orangutan in my room. Now, I must give it to Greenpeace. A very nice animation that was done with very classy animation. Give it to them. But it sends a vibrant message. It pulls to the heartstrings of the consumers and tells the consumer again that palm is dirty, and you want to avoid palm. This is very concerning to us, because on the flip side, okay, we are in the process of cleaning up our act. We've never claimed to be the saints of the world or the environmental crusaders of the world, right? We are now certifying palm oil through various certification standards, let it be RSPO, MSPO, ISPO, ISCC, you name it, we are prescribing to it. That prescription must be respected. We ask Greenpeace to respect that, because otherwise you see the bottom scenario where the world, and including especially populations in Asia, you need to provide affordable food. And trust me, if you take palm oil away from the food system, that affordability will be compromised. But on the top of it, you have the founding father of Greenpeace, the gentleman called Patrick Moore. I'm alerting you because the green environmentalists are not as clean and as real as sometimes they are made out to be. And there is a different view from the founder father of Greenpeace today, and this is real telling, because he himself has said that the green NGOs, like Greenpeace, have been taking money and compromising their stature in many ways. So it is a rough and tough battle. Unfortunately, palm is in the center of this, and we need to continue doing this. Now, the RED directive, biofuel, early this year, when the trilogue was completed, many in our circles shouted victory, because we stopped, or we managed to arrest the impending ban on palm oil used in Europe in biofuels. Let me trust you that what the Europeans have done is simply taken palm oil out of the critical care unit, CCU unit, or intensive care unit in a hospital, and put us back in a general ward. We have not been discharged yet. The battle is still going on, and the battle will intensify. I always say my European friends go enjoy summer, and while they're enjoying the sun and dance in summer, they're thinking something very obnoxious for palm oil. And sure enough, in autumn, they come back with a bang. And what's happening now is we are feeling the bang of the anti-palm oil sentiment, and more work needs to be done. It's not going to go away, and it is there to stay. And the food versus fuel debate will continue. And this agenda will continue. And I just want to tell you that while this continues, let us be reminded that the palm has a productive system, outshines the other oilseed crop. Just in the oilseed sector, forget the other commodities, just in the oilseed sector, it outshines. We boast of about 3.5 to 4 tons of oil per hectare, but we are still lagging. The challenge to the plantation houses here, one is replanting, two is putting the right clones where your yield per hectare can do a jump start. You cannot go on sitting on the laurels and say 4 is good, getting to 5 is better, because the biological maxima of palm per hectare happens to be in the range of about 12 tons of oil per hectare or more. We are nowhere near the target. What we are telling ourselves in the know is if we can push everybody, especially the smallholders, towards a 6-ton target, we're doing a great job. But we have to do the job and still outbeat the industry players, the competition, who are still a shade much lower and way below. So this is the advantage, but if we don't cash in on the advantage, in the longer term, we will pay the price. Just to reinforce again, as humans, we're never going to stop reproducing. We have been religiously propagating the human race, and it's not going to stop. And population explosion, no matter what you do, is going to grow. And with population, you need to provide food. And again, let's go back and say that, no, don't forget that the oil and fat will remain as a food ingredient required for the maintenance and health of a human being. Now, if you do not put up enough systems into all oil-bearing seed crops and cultivation, there is going to be possibly a deficit in the supply. Production versus consumption will be deficit. Now, I'm going to throw an open challenge. While we prescribe to certification and sustainability, let's say in 20 years, the world gets to a situation where there is not enough oils and fats. You become less concerned about sustainability. You just want to be able to get the crop and to be able to feed. Will the issues of sustainability still matter? Will the world take green over feed requirements? That's a question we don't know. But having said that, I'm not advocating that palm oil reverses its commitment to sustainability. There is no question that we want to reverse our current commitment and progress towards sustainability and certification. That is a goal we need to move forward and move forward in even greater leaps and bounds. That's required because we can't get regressive. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more happening in the palm oil industry. I'm glad that at today's and tomorrow's briefing talks, there are other people who are going to talk at length on some of these subject matters. So I just picked out some things and said we'll share with you. But the bottom line is that while people ask me, is this going to be a sunset industry? Or Malaysia, is it going to close shop and devote its oil palm land to real estate? I don't think so. We will continue to invest in it, but the investment must pay a dividend in terms of a profit in the balance sheet to the companies that invest in it or the individuals. So that's required. Now, whichever way you look at it, we actually require less land per ton of oil yield per hectare than the competing oilseed crop. That is a strength. But the strength needs to be built on by higher productivity, not only just planting, but clonal material, higher productivity, etc., which we are not probably investing enough. And this needs to be possibly a policy direction. And if you consider that arable agricultural land around the world is shrinking, you need to do something about it. And palm offers, at least in the tropical belt, 10 degrees north and south of the equator, it will still provide the best opportunity to sustain and supply and feed the population in the world. Okay? I simply want to say that with Malaysia, we are moving ahead with our own certification system. A lot of people ask, is this going to be internationally accepted? We'll wait for the international acceptance. Let's get our acreage into a respectable number and then talk about international acceptance. But along the way, the principles and criteria are being modified to international standard requirement, to ISO requirements, etc. So overall, we have a good story to tell. It has been a difficult story to sell, but we will continue selling on your behalf. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.